Good evening, all. I don't know if can everybody hear us?
Give a thumbs up.
Thumbs up. Okay, fantastic. All right. I think firstly from Hammer Nutrition side, we'd like to just thank Soulmate Paul from Soulmate for arranging this. We really do appreciate it. And I think as he mentioned in the meeting in his slides, you know, nutrition is one of these things that really is stated. Many people find this a very difficult, you know, sector to get ready for your race. So I think what are we going to try? Simple. Both Neil and I can talk for ages on nutrition, but I think what we're going to do is just summarize it to the 5 secrets of success. Just before I get into that, Neil will cover this in more detail. Just to give you guys a little bit of background with Hammer Nutrition, it's been around for nearly 35 years. We've become really famous for what we do products. So we don't have any simple sugars, any preservatives, any colorants. The products are vegetarian and vegan friendly. And I think, you know, at the end of the day, this is probably the perfect time for you guys to start preparing for the new season ahead and start trialing, using things, and you know, training as you're going to race with the product. So what I'm going to do is just hand you over to Neil. Neil's our fueling expert. We'll put his email address into the chat room. And as I say, please, guys, feel free to put anything into the comments sections, any questions you want answered. We just hope that you will find this very informative. So, yes, over to you, Neil. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sean. And yes, thank you to Paul for having us again for a nice fueling talk. As Sean said, my name is Neil. I'm the fuel expert or fueling expert for Hammer UK. Just one or two little quick ground rules. I see there's a couple people that haven't muted their microphones, so please do that. Otherwise, any noise in the background when you sneeze or cough, and it interrupts with some of the information coming through. So if we just mute your mics, that'll be great. And then if you have any questions, throw them into the chat. I've got my chat open, so I will see any questions there and I'll answer them as soon as possible. So what we're going to talk about today is the secrets of success. I've been around with Hammer for quite a long time, for about 16, 17 years. It used to be called the Little Red Book. I actually have an old one on my shelf here. And it's pretty much the guidelines that Hammer have used for a very long time. When I was starting to ride longer distances, etc., in the mid-2000s, came from a background lots of cricket and football, team sports, and then I started, for some reason, deciding to do an Ironman and those type of events. So very different from team sports, which is high-intensity intervals. And I really did find that there weren't many fuels that actually worked for me, and that's where I found Hammer. And so that is my background. And since then, I've done 4 Ironmans. I actually went to London in 2013 as an age grouper to compete at the World Champs in the RTU series, so that's Olympic distance. And I've done multiple stage race events, long 200-kilometer rides. We've got a big ride in South Africa called the Double Century. So I've become definitely more of an endurance athlete over the last 10, 15 years. And that is my basic background. I also was a personal trainer for about 25 years. And then I got tired of getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to actually motivate other people to train. It was hard enough to do it myself, and now other people was also a bit too challenging. And since then, now I'm full-time with Hammer. So that is my background. And if there's any questions, please don't hesitate. I think the biggest advantage I have is that I've done lots of sports. I've been doing the industry for a while, and I know the products very well. And not only of Hammer, but other brands. So I can always help people work around what their strengths are, what sport they are doing. So it's not only exclusively endurance sport. It could be track sessions, it could be swimming, it could be paddles, the latest big sports all around the planet. And some of our products are actually very good for paddle sessions and tennis and other type of ball sports. So let's get into the SOS. Secrets of success. And I always say, hopefully they're not going to be such a big secret, because it's quite simple information. And I think there is so much information out there from different nutrition brands, from different scientists, people that are studying nutrition and saying, do this, do that, etc. Unfortunately, very often it's targeted or it's researched on elite athletes, the top 1%. And just like we know Eliud Kipchoge, he can run a 2-hour marathon. He's the top 0.01%. The top 1% of cyclists can push 500 watts for 5 minutes. We know this from a scientific point of view, but that doesn't mean we can all achieve that. And unfortunately, we do still try to follow those same elite athletes and try to get the same nutrition as them. Whereas we can't live the same lifestyle. We don't have the same genetic component. We don't have the 10,000 hours of training behind us. So our bodies are just not in the same position to fuel in the same way. And that's where our slogan, less is best, comes from. The latest research is saying you must be consuming pretty much 120 grams of carbohydrates an hour, which is 480 calories. But very, very few people can do that. Once again, you're talking about less than 1% of athletes can fuel to that maximum. So it's great to say that is the extent of human performance from a nutrition perspective, but what is your performance? Where are you on that scale? And less is best is the best option. So looking at what you take in during exercise or what you lose electrolytes, you lose hydration or fluids, and you also burn calories. So the idea is you're trying to replace those during exercise. So you're trying to find that fine balance between overconsumption, which can lead to serious imbalances within the body, or underconsumption, where you don't have the energy, or you start to cramp because you've got a lack of electrolytes, or you become dehydrated. But ultimately, less is always going to be best, because once it's in, and it's going to come out in a bad way or have a negative result. Whereas if you are struggling, you can always up your intake when necessary. So looking at hydration, for example, you could easily lose 1.5 liters in warm conditions, in fluids, sometimes even more than that. But you can probably replace effectively up to about 50% of your losses. And that will vary once again for some athletes. Some athletes might be lower, down to 30% of what they lose. Then electrolytes, you could lose 600 milligrams of sodium an hour. It can even be higher than that. Some of the research shows that some athletes lose 1,000 milligrams of sodium an hour. But to replace all of that is virtually impossible. And you're looking at, once again, between 30 and 50% of your losses. And then when it comes to calories, that can actually drop even lower, because calories take a lot more effort for the body to digest compared to just hydration, where the fluids go into your stomach and then into your gut. Same as electrolytes, they pass a lot easier into your gut. Whereas when it comes to calories, it takes a lot more effort from the body to actually digest those calories. 30% of your losses is what you should be focusing on when you are fueling during exercise. And that is your starting point. So if you are burning 500 calories an hour, you'd only get in about 20 to 30% of that. And all this will come around, will be dependent on, first of all, your training. Have you trained your body to hydrate properly? Have you trained your body to consume and digest those calories properly? And then there's still the genetic component and body size, because a 100-kilogram athlete that is losing 500 milligrams of sodium an hour versus a 50-kilogram athlete that's losing 500 milligrams of sodium an hour, their body's capacity to actually replace that is very, very different. So you have to find what works for you. But these basic guidelines of between 30 and 50% for fluids and your electrolyte levels, specifically sodium, and then around 20 to 30% of calories that you burn, you're trying to replace that. That is your starting point. And as you become more consistent with your fueling, consistent with your training, you can actually take little steps up that ladder to get to better performance. Because ultimately, if you can replace everything that you lose, it will help you perform better. But the issue is, it's what can go through your stomach. That is the limiting factor. Not how much you sweat out, not how much you burn, it's what can your stomach digest. And your stomach is like any system in the body, it needs to be trained. Just like your muscles, you start off with small, easier workouts, and you build and build and build. It's exactly the same with your digestive system. So that is our philosophy. Less is best for your best performance. So that leads us on to the simple slide there, the whole thing of X out, X in. It was for so many years. It was always replace what you burn. And we know through experience, as Sean said, over 35 years of experience at Hammer, but also looking at the science that is always targeted at those elite high performance athletes. whose bodies function different. They've got the 10,000 hours of training. They've got a nutritional sponsor that can just give them free product all the time. That can also make a difference. So all those factors come into play. And for instance, the Tour de France cyclists are one of the best examples. They spend 6 months before they even go to the Tour de France. They spend a 2-week training in South Africa. They do it. They go up to Mallorca. They do high altitude training, and they do a lot of low intensity riding. And what they do is they focus on fueling as much as possible during those longer, slower days 6 months before. And I'd have to say 99% of other athletes don't have that opportunity. And once again, they training and trying to train their body to fuel for a 3-week event, whereas most of us are doing a 1-day event every couple of months. So to follow those guidelines doesn't really work. So X out is not the same as X in, and you have to start at a lower level and train your body effectively. Right, I did see, I think there was a little question there, unless it was something I just saw pop up, the chat.
Sorry, it was me, Neil. Ignore that.
Oh, was that you? Okay. Okay, so that's just Paul saying, yeah, we are recording the session. It's in the cloud, so we will have that available afterwards, and there is a little special that he's doing. And just to quickly mention a few of the products before we even get to the pre-exercise feeding, because we know some of you might not know our main products, but I'm going to mention 3. The first one is called HEED. So HEED, which stands for High Energy Electrolyte Drink. It's basically a carbohydrate drink with electrolytes. High energy, high glycemic carbohydrates in the form of maltodextrin, which is a complex carbohydrate with a high glycemic index. So that means from the time you ingest it from the mouth to the time it actually gets to your blood glucose and affects your blood sugar levels, it happens very quickly for a few reasons. Firstly, it goes through your gut very quickly without causing gut upsets. But then it also gets broken down, and when it gets to your bloodstream, it doesn't cause a spike. It causes an increase and then stability. So that's the carbohydrates that we like to use. And there's electrolytes. So it's an all-round drink that's primarily designed for exercise under 2 hours. Under 2 hours, all you need is a carbohydrate drink with electrolytes. When you go longer, you might have heard about you need to eat a bit when you do longer exercise. We have something called Perpetuum, which stands for perpetual energy. And that's exactly what it does. It gives you hours and hours energy for days if necessary. And it's basically taking the HEED, which is the carb drink with electrolytes, adding a bit of fats and protein. So you don't only get the 1 macronutrient in carbs, you also get fats and protein. So 3 macronutrients. So it's food that you drink. And we've just launched the 2.0 in both of those products, which has a slightly different source of carbohydrates. And it's a much cleaner source, slightly less processing, no GMO at all. So once again, slightly healthier for you. And the last product that I'll mention as the main fuel will be gels. We all know gels. You've seen all the different types of gels. There's some fancy new technologies coming out now. Some have caffeine, some have hydros in them. They have all these different things. They're isotonic, hypertonic, so many different terms linked to gels. But essentially, a gel is a concentrated form of carbohydrates. Most of them are pretty much the same. Some have amino acids, like we do. Some don't. Some have more electrolytes, some don't. But a gel is essentially a concentrated source of carbohydrates. And looking at our different products now, 1 scoop or 1 serving of HEED is 110 calories. And I mention these numbers so you can start thinking about calories per hour and the comparison between the different products. So HEED is 110 calories per scoop. Perpetuum is 90 calories per scoop. It used to be a slightly different version with the classic, but it's 90 calories per scoop. And then our gels are 90 to 100 calories per gel, depending on the flavor. So they're all very closely linked, or the caloric equivalent per scoop, not always necessarily per serving, is very similar. Just so you understand it, and you know, if you're going to use 1 scoop of HEED an hour, you'll pretty much use 1 scoop of Perpetuum an hour, or 1 gel an hour. But if you combine all 3 products, then you actually have to use less per hour, because the amount of calories per hour will be very similar. So those are main 3 fuels. Keep on remembering them. If you're not sure, just quickly put a message in the chat again, and we can always just quantify and just re-inform you what those products are. So looking at something called pre-exercise fueling, and this is our SOS number 1. And what I think a lot of athletes sometimes miss is that what you do in that 3-hour window before exercise can drastically affect your performance during short duration exercise, but during long duration exercise, and also how you feel post-exercise. Because ultimately, in an ideal world, you'll always have something before, whatever you can take in during, and then refuel straight away. If you can do all those three things, you reduce depletion. If you reduce depletion, then you're going to have a better performance and a better recovery, a stronger immune system. But a lot of the times we often skip what we do beforehand. So we have something called a 3-hour rule. And ideally what you don't want to do is have a big meal in the 3-hour window before exercise. Because ultimately what you need to do in that 3-hour window is just to top up your glycogen stores, add a bit of hydration, and add a bit of electrolytes. Those are the three things you need. But the problem with having a proper meal an hour and a half or 2 hours before, and you're talking about a meal of 400-ish calories, it takes 3 to 4 hours for that meal to digest properly. So if you're eating that 2 hours before, when you start exercising, you still have a significant amount of food in your stomach. And then you're going to be focusing on digestion. The body doesn't divert the resources to the working muscles, and you, generally speaking, don't feel that great at the start. So that's the first issue. Second issue is you've got this food bouncing around in your stomach. That's more likely to cause nausea or stomach upsets. So especially if you're running, you don't digest food very well. If you sit on a bicycle, the stomach's less or more stable. It's not going to be as drastic an effect. But running especially is an issue. So the first issue is you don't want to have digesting food, resources to the digestive system, not to the working muscles. You don't want to have that food bouncing around to create nausea. And then you look at more physiological things happening in the body. Even if you have a high protein meal, you could still have a glucose or insulin spike because how the body breaks down that protein. If you have so much protein in the 2-hour window before you start, the body can't break down all that protein in that space of time. The amount of protein you break down in an hour, the body is limited. And the body will take that protein and turn it into carbohydrates. So that can cause your blood sugar levels to go up by having a protein meal, a high protein meal. If you have that, whether it's carbohydrates or protein, you can still cause your blood sugar levels to go up too quickly, which means the body's going to release insulin, causing your blood sugar levels to drop. And that sequence continues for a few hours afterwards until it stabilizes. And what you don't want to be doing is that insulin affecting your body as you start exercise, causing blood sugar levels to decrease, and then you have that blood sugar crash right at the start of exercise. And the other issue with insulin is it actually inhibits your fat burning ability and causes you to burn through your carbohydrate stores faster. If you don't access your fat stores, especially for endurance exercise, you're going to fatigue earlier. If you burn through your carbohydrate stores faster because of insulin levels, you also fatigue earlier. So those are the reasons why you don't want that big meal in that 3-hour window. And all you actually need to do is, if you're going to have a meal and you feel like you have to, try to finish 3 hours before. A nice example is in the afternoon, when you train at 5 o'clock, for example, you'll have lunch between 12 and 1. You naturally have a 3 or 4 hour break before you exercise. But the problem is often in the morning. You don't get up early enough, or on race day, you decide, I have to have something. But every training session that you wake up early in the morning, you just have a cup of coffee and off you go to your training session and then have breakfast after. But on race day, we have this feeling we have to have a meal, and your body's not used to it. So you do not have to have a meal. All you actually need is about 200 calories to top up your overnight losses. But if you do have a meal, and say you're doing an Ironman, you're starting at 7:30, you have to be in transition, or you're doing London Marathon and you have to travel from out of town to get to the start, you will have a 3-hour window. So then you have your breakfast. But then you must still be quite picky about what you eat. You shouldn't have too much protein. You shouldn't have a lot of saturated fats, and you should really try to avoid super sugary or refined carbohydrates. And then you still want to limit that meal to about 300 to 400 calories. And there's a great example of what you can eat, something like a bagel. And I'm talking about proper stone ground bagels, not the white bread in a circle type ones. You want a proper complex carbohydrate bagel, and you can add some peanut butter to it, or even a bit of salmon, something like that. And that gives you a 400 calorie meal 3 or 4 hours before you start. Right, then what happens is when you get to the start, or when you're closer, an hour and a half, then you start actually topping up with a liquid form of carbohydrates. Because like I mentioned, you don't want that solid food in your stomach when you start exercising. So use the liquid form to top up glycogen stores, and then you can get some electrolytes from the same product. And that's where heat comes in. So 1 scoop of heat in that hour and a half window before you start, and then a gel half an hour before you start. That is your 200 calories. That's really all you need to do before your race day. or before your big sessions on the weekend. Maybe even before your 10K run on a Tuesday morning, you might wake up, have a gel with a coffee, and then go do your exercise, just to give yourself that little top of energy. Not only to give you the extra carbs to exercise during the exercise, but by having that little bit of calories, you actually start metabolic processes from the mouth into the stomach, and that will improve your energy supply. And if you have 100 calories before a midweek session, then you're going to have 100 calories more in the body by the time you get to the end of the session, which means you are less depleted. So trying to reduce depletion by having those little bit of calories every now and then will make a big difference. So that is our basics behind pre-exercise fueling. You can quickly change it slightly, Sean. So just to recap on pre-exercise, 3-hour window, no big meal. In that 3-hour window, all you need is 200 calories from a liquid source, 1 scoop of heat, 1 gel, that's 200 calories. I'll add the extra bonus of some Endurelight Extreme, which is the anti-cramp, and we also have something called Fully Charged, which is the pre-workout. Think of that as a super duper espresso without any sugar or lactose or anything that's going to be a negative that you might find in your morning coffee. Right, then we'll go on to SOS number 2, and this is the real crux of when you exercise and what fueling is about, because ultimately you have to find that balance between underfueling and overfueling. And I'll reiterate, very important thing to remember is that it's individual. It comes down to your own training, how often you actually practice your fueling, how many years you've been training, and some people just have a stronger stomach. And what we generally find is people that have been training for a lot longer, they tend to be able to consume. They might try one product one day, another product the next day. Sometimes they have solid food, and their stomachs are just more used to breaking down calories while they exercise through the years of actually training. The same as somebody that hasn't trained for a couple of years, but they trained for 20 years before, they get back in quite quickly. But somebody that has never trained their whole life, they get fit over a couple of years, they take a bit of time off, they might take a bit longer than that person that is super fit their whole life to actually get back to a level of fitness. But ultimately, why do we consume energy while we exercise? There it is. The goal is to maintain high energy levels, to postpone fatigue, and to avoid bonking. So all those things, very important, are flexible. And there's the reasons why, depending on how fast you go. If you are running faster, shorter duration exercise, the body's working harder. So very often it can't actually help you digest more calories. Most people often say, well, I'm exercising for shorter to high intensity, I have to consume more, but there's more load on the body. So that means there's less effort or less resources to actually digest those calories in the stomach. Temperature makes a big difference. Warmer temperatures tend to mean your body can't digest as many calories. Body size, bigger bodies, bigger stomachs. You can consume more calories. And then the type of activity, like I mentioned earlier on, runners tend to have 20 to 30% less ability to actually consume calories. Swimmers, for example, Ironman, you used to using freshwater swims, and now you're going out to the coast and you're doing a saltwater swim. So you're not used to that extra salt in your stomach. So that can also affect how you do your pre-race nutrition. So all those type of activities can make a massive difference, and be flexible. And I think what's important is that flexibility is also through experience. So the more consistently you practice your nutrition, the more you learn how to adjust it. So don't only wait that 2-3 weeks before your big event, or only on your longer sessions on the weekends. You try to do it in the shorter sessions during the week too. Okay, thank you, Sean. So, right, let's talk about what to consume or exactly how much. I've already mentioned that 120 calories, or especially carbohydrate calories an hour, that is the research that says that is the epitome of human performance. And if you can achieve that, your performance will be better. But we know that 1% of athletes can actually achieve that, because that is 120 grams of carbs an hour if you're only running on carbs, which is almost 5 gels an hour if you're only using gels. And I've never, ever met anybody that can do 5 gels an hour. Maybe 3 or 4, but now you're talking about, once again, your top triathletes, your top runners that can consume that. But the majority and the vast majority of people don't even get close to that. So we look at 120 to 180 calories an hour, which is a lot lower than some of the research out there. That is 30 to 45 grams of carbs if you're only focusing on carbs. So it's a lot lower. But that is your nice range for where you are now and where you are training most of the time. And then as you become more experienced, you might find you actually consume less, depending on the activity, and sometimes slightly more. But that 120 to 180 calories per hour of complex carbs is where you want to be most of the time. And as I mentioned earlier, runners should consume 20 to 30% less because your stomach is bouncing around. And now the next big point is talking about protein for longer duration. So I already mentioned heat is the ideal option for below 2 hours because all you need for less than 2 hours is carbohydrates. Your body can use all those carbohydrates. It can focus on using carbohydrates. But the issue is when you start going over 2.5 hours, 3 hours, then your carbohydrate stores are depleting no matter how much you're consuming. As we've been talking about, you can't replace all those carbohydrates. But carbohydrates are a vital source of energy. It's basically the energy your body will rely on in a fight or flight response. And when you're exercising, your body's under stress. So it doesn't want to use those too much in case something goes wrong and it really, really needs those carbs. So eventually the body starts to go, well, let's look for other energy sources. And we know during long duration exercise, fat is a great option. Your body will try utilize that as much as possible. And that's why it's still important to practice your fueling because your body becomes more effective at accessing your fat stores. But the other issue is the body will also try to use protein as an energy source. It'll break down the muscles in your body to supply amino acids that will be used as energy. So those working muscles that are under pressure are being broken down. That means more pain. When you break down animal protein, it's more acidity in the body. There's going to be more post-exercise stiffness and more likelihood of cramp during exercise. So you want to limit that muscle breakdown to supply amino acids. And that's why over 2.5, 3 hours, 10 to 15% of your fuel should come from a plant-based protein to limit that breakdown of your muscles. And what you must also remember is when you're going longer, the combination of carbohydrates and protein, they actually enhance each other's ability to be absorbed properly. So if you're only doing carbs 5 hours into an exercise session, the body's ability to utilize protein is negatively affected. Or if you're only consuming protein 5 hours into a long duration event, your body's ability to access and utilize carbs is also compromised. So utilizing carbs and protein correctly during those longer sessions becomes more, they actually help each other to become more effective and keep your energy levels constant. So that's the basics there. Next one, please, Sean. Right, and there is what we also stand for. I've spoken about less is best. So I've mentioned complex carbs quite a bit. I've stayed away from the simple sugars because we do not add sugar to our products. So I've mentioned maltodextrin. Maltodextrin is a high glycemic carbohydrate. It's got a glycemic index of 135. You look at something like glucose, which is a simple sugar, sucrose, lactose, maltose, fructose. They've all got different glycemic indexes. They all end in OSE. Those are simple sugars. We don't add that to our products. Main reason being, simple sugars have a different osmolality or density to your stomach juices. They have to spend more time in your stomach and be diluted. And effectively what they do is they actually draw more resources from the working muscles to help the body digest those calories. And that's why if you have a lot of fruit juice or you have a lot of wine gums, you feel that gurgling in your stomach. Essentially, that's the body taking more effort to break down those sugars. So that's the first issue with simple sugars. It creates stomach distress. Even something like fructose, fruit sugar, even in low concentrations, it can still cause serious stomach distress. The second issue is even low glycemic simple sugar like fructose, which is around 32, that takes a while to get into your stomach because of, a while to get into your bloodstream because of the slow transit time through your stomach, but it can still cause a sugar spike, which then causes an insulin spike, which then causes a sugar crash. And that's the main reason why we don't use simple sugars or don't add simple carbs to our products. And if you're looking at general health, it's still a better option to reduce your sugar intake. Complex carbs are king, not only carbs are king. And that's why not candy, not using maple syrup or honey or anything else during exercise. Same rule. There's lots of simple sugars and you want to avoid that. So proper complex carbohydrates for anything under 2 hours, and then adding a nice plant-based protein, about 10 to 15% of your fuel should come from a plant-based protein over 2.5, 3 hours. And that's where I'll come back to Perpetuum once again. Perpetuum takes out the thinking. If you are used to using a carb-only drink and you're going, well, I'm taking 20 grams of carbs an hour and now I need to add 5 grams of protein an hour, it becomes quite difficult to work out what to take, when to take it. And that's why Perpetuum is such an amazing product. You just have to focus on how many scoops an hour and off you go. You don't have to think, I have to take X amount of carbs and X amount of protein. You're looking at your total calories. So if you're used to using 150 calories an hour for an hour and a half or 2 hours of a carb-only fuel, it'll be exactly the same when you have a protein-enhanced fuel like Perpetuum. You'll still use 150 calories an hour, but already that product gives you the breakdown, the difference between the carbohydrates and the protein without you having to think about it. Yes, next please, Sean. Right, and there's the Dream Team, which we've touched on already. Starting from the left-hand side, your Hammer Gels and Heed, pretty much the fuel you'll use for under 2 hours. And remember, as I mentioned, you can use those fuels in longer duration exercise, but then you will need to find your protein from another source. And then we've got the Perpetuum and the Sustained Energy. Perpetuum 2.0 is the latest, and it's selling very, very well. And we probably won't be having the normal Perpetuum in the future. And then we've also got the Perpetuum Solids, and that's a chocolate version. And essentially, Solids is a chewable form of Perpetuum. It's Perpetuum powder that's been compacted. Think about some of the other brands that have gummies or something to chew on, chews, those type of things. We don't have a product like that because then you have to add preservatives and gelatins and gums to it. We've got something called Perpetuum Solids. It's a dry product, and it comes in about a nice little biscuit size, and it contains 34 calories in Perpetuum, and it's a chewable version of Perpetuum. Especially the runners, long duration runners, they like to chew on 1 or 2 of them every now and then, but it is a variation of the normal Perpetuum. And then the last one on the right-hand side is the Hammer Bar. Slightly different in nutrient breakdown to Perpetuum. It is a protein option too, but whereas Perpetuum is an 8-to-1 ratio of carbohydrates to protein, bars are a 6-to-1 or 7-to-1. So it actually has a slightly higher protein content. And the bars will be regarded as a solid fuel option. So if you're doing a 50-mile or 100-mile trail run, those become your meals instead of grabbing bread or other sort of food stuffs that can mess with your stomach. That is a great solid food option with a slightly higher protein content for a much longer event. And once again, those products you can use all together at the same time, but you wouldn't be using the same volume per hour if you're only using one fuel. So if you're using 1 scoop of Perpetuum an hour, but then you're also having a bite of a bar in every now and then, you probably have to reduce your Perpetuum intake. It's about total calories per hour, regardless of whether you're using 1 fuel or using 4 fuels. Thank you, Sean.
Do you want to put yours on the higher shelf?
I'm on fucking Teams meeting and you talking about chips.
Sorry.
Don't forget to mute your mics there, please, guys.
Okay.
Okay, next slide, please, Sean. Right, now into hydration. So this is the third SOS. And the biggest thing to remember with hydration is it will still vary from person to person and your conditions. But hydration is achieved on a daily basis. It's not something you only do during races. You don't only do in 2 or 3 days before an event where you start to add extra hydration. We're not very good at loading water. The saying is we're not built like camels. We have different size or different shaped blood cells. We can't actually absorb and store water like camels do. So the idea is to, if you are going from the UK and you're going to do a race in Spain or something like that, where it's going to be warmer, where you're going to altitude, a different environment, a different climate, the idea is to start weeks and months ahead to increase the body's ability to absorb water during the day, not only during exercise, but during the day. And then when you start traveling to another environment, especially if you're flying, because when you fly, you become more dehydrated in that air, the filtered air in the aeroplane. So it's not a bad idea to then start increasing hydration, but not by 100%, maybe 5 or 10% above what you used to. Because ultimately, when you increase hydration, you're trying to compensate for more losses. And if you're training in the same environment day in, day out, and your race is in the same environment that you're used to training, you're not really going to be sweating more in your event. So there's no reason to add extra hydration. Only change your hydration when you are changing your environment, when you're starting to sweat more and you have greater losses. So it's done every single day. Sean, you can change the next slide. The simple rule for You've heard it before, 8 glasses of water a day, which is about 2 liters. But to break it down to individuals, look at your own body weight in kilograms. And it's about 33 to 39 milliliters per kilogram of body weight per day. That is your goal. Smaller athletes, lower end, bigger athletes, higher end. And it will also depend on your own requirements. For instance, you might have been brought up in a very humid, warm environment, and then when you become a teenager, you move to a much colder environment. So your body's, how it cools itself is slightly different versus somebody that's been brought up in a cold environment their whole life. So always look at those individual differences. And then for during exercise, you've got 2 guidelines. The first one being 590 to 740 milliliters per hour during exercise, and linking it to your body weight, there's 8 to 10 milliliters per kilogram per hour, up to a maximum of 830. And I'll mention that because it's been shown through a lot of good science that if you consistently drink more than 830 milliliters an hour for a few hours during exercise, you overhydrate your body. You eventually start to retain water, you become super hydrated, you can actually start secreting extra sodium, which means there's a huge imbalance in your sodium serum levels, and that can lead to cramp and more serious issues with other cells that don't function. And there's your, consider the temp and body weight. Lighter athletes, cooler temps, usually going to consume less. Heavier athletes, warmer temperatures, you're going to consume a little bit more. And then if you get to that point where you can't consume anymore, or you're reaching that limit of consumption, then you can use the extra water on exposed body parts to cool yourself down, because that is one of the reasons why you drink water during exercise, is to keep your temperature internally down, not only just to give you water to replace what you're losing through the sweat. So those are the basic guidelines. Once again, it's something you need to practice and try different levels at different times, in the morning versus lunchtime, in the evening, indoors versus outdoors. If you're training a lot indoors on an indoor bike, you don't have the air rushing over your body. If you're running on a treadmill indoors, there's also no airflow, and you might be in a confined area, and that creates more heat, and then you sweat more indoors. So take those type of that information in consideration and learn to adjust through experience how much you hydrate with. Yes, Sean. Right, and then electrolytes. I did mention the sodium. Very important to keep that balance between hydration and electrolyte intake. Because electrolytes, we use an analogy of a car. You've got your petrol in the back, that's your calories, whether it's carbohydrates, fats, or protein. That fuels the engine, that keeps it going, that gives it the drive forward. But there's all the other fluids in the engine. You've got oil, which is your most important. That is your sodium in your car engine. But you still have your battery acid, your hydraulic fluid, your coolant. You have your windscreen wiper fluid. I always mention that as a sort of last one. But at some point, you're going to need all those fluids for your car to function properly. You're not only going to need oil, not only sodium. You're going to need a full spectrum of electrolytes. And that's one of the product, or one of the, all our products actually have a full spectrum of electrolytes. So it's sodium and potassium, they balance each other out. They keep the internal and the external environment of your cells in balance. It's like a seesaw. If you only load the one side with sodium, the seesaw doesn't work. You have to load the other side with potassium, and they have to balance each other out. And that means nutrients go into your cells and waste products can be removed. But you need sodium and potassium to be in the correct balance. Then you also need calcium and magnesium, because calcium is very important for muscular activity. And if you don't consume calcium, the body will take it from your bones. So you literally break down your bone matrix to supply calcium for muscular activity. And you also need magnesium to replace the calcium in the muscles to help the muscles relax, which happens in a very quick sequence. And also manganese and chloride, those are a couple other electrolytes, but you need a full spectrum, and salt is not the answer. And just like that super hydration in the few days before an event, you cannot hyperload on sodium. Sodium levels that are too high are toxic for the body. And what will happen to the body if you take a lot of salt in, which is only sodium and chloride, you actually end up secreting more sodium, because sodium levels that are too high are actually toxic. So the body will try to secrete more sodium. So if you try load up in the days before with lots of sodium, you can actually end up on the start line of your event with lower sodium serum levels, which will affect that cellular balance once again. And there's the guideline: no more than 100 to 600 milligrams of sodium chloride per hour, which works out to about, it's 240 milligrams of sodium alone per hour. And that's what you get from 2 capsules of Endurelight Extreme or 1 fizz, which is our effervescent hydration option. So be very wary of overloading with sodium. And we still have quite a lot of sodium in our body. We've got about 2,000 to 3,000 milligrams, depending on body size. So it's one of those things you cannot run out of. Same as you cannot run out of energy. I'll just mention that from a if you're worried about underfueling and then running out of energy, your body is very effective at sourcing energy internally, and your fat stores are vast. A small, lightweight athlete can have 45, 50,000 calories in fat stored in the body. But the issue is if you don't access that properly, and if you don't fuel properly during exercise and you have high insulin levels, you can't access your fat stores. So you cannot run out of energy, and you cannot actually run out of sodium. You can run low on sodium, but the biggest negative is, once again, overload. Too much calories, too much sodium, too much water. That's when you're going to have the biggest issues. And we know stomach issues are one of the biggest reasons runners don't finish events. So be very, very wary of overloading. So those are the 3 SOSs, SOS 2, SOS 3 and 4, that are really to do with what you do from a nutrition aspect during exercise. And that is always your focus when you're training. If you can reduce that depletion and feel better at the end of a session because you've had more consistent energy levels, it's going to improve your performance, it improves your immune system, it improves recovery. And that is always your goal. Not to have that, I'm feeling really buzzy, I'm really energetic. There's always going to be a crash after that. And then you feed it again because of all the sugar, and then you have the crash again. But it's going to leave you more depleted. Keep those energy levels nice and consistent by combining your calories, combining your hydration, and combining electrolytes. And there's the examples that we use, the different products that we have. I do have a bit of fizz over here if you've never seen it before. This is our effervescent version. Goes in your water, 1 capsule every 2 hours, or is ideal. It's 200 milligrams of sodium bicarbonate. But we do have the other capsules that you can use, Endurelight Extreme and Endurelight. And the best thing about those 2 products is they are a standalone electrolyte option. So you don't have to take hydration in, and you don't have to take calories in to get your electrolytes. You can only take electrolytes. And there's a bit of ginger root. And ginger root is great to help settle your stomach, no stomach issues, and then also as a natural anti-inflammatory. And Endurelight Extreme specifically for those that really need it. If you are a salty eater, you are a salty sweater. So you will secrete more sodium during exercise if you add a lot of salt to your food, or you eat a lot of food with salt in it. If you're prone to cramping, early season, also a big difference because you tend to sweat more when you're less fit, hot weather, and you're unacclimatized. Those are the reasons when you should have a standalone electrolyte option like Endurelight Extreme. Okay, thank you, Sean. I think it's just going on to the recovery. So this is SOS number 5. And like I mentioned right at the start, there's 3 things you really want to achieve with nutrition during and before and after exercise. If you can have that a little bit before, if you can have X amount during, depending on how much you can fuel with, and you do recovery fueling, that is plan A. If you can do that consistently, you will have less depletion during exercise, you will have more consistent energy during exercise, you have faster recovery, and that leads to better performance. But if there's one thing you must do, if you sometimes forget to do the other 2 things of having something before, and maybe during the shorter sessions you don't want to have something during, make sure you refuel straight away. And the main reason being is your body's in the best position to take nutrients and actually utilize them to help recover. If you wait 3-4 hours later and then try to refuel, all those enzymes and hormones that are released during exercise are now not available in your body. So you cannot take the protein as effectively. You cannot take the carbs as effectively and then utilize them straight away after exercise. So try to get recovery fueling in straight away. And there it is. Get full value from the workout. The sooner you replenish, the better. Minimize soreness and prepare for the next workout. That's the main goal. And essentially, you want to get some calories back in. Get your glycogen levels back up. The faster you get your glycogen levels back up, the stronger your immune system. You can actually increase glycogen storage by fueling straight away. And that means you have more carbohydrates. If you have more carbohydrates stored in your body, or you can actually fatigue later in your next workout. So it's very important to do that. And you want to start with protein recovery or cellular repair, because regardless of whether you're going long and slow or high intensity and short, there is cellular damage, and you want that to be repaired as quickly as possible. And the idea is in that first half an hour, get a liquid recovery fuel in. Just like before you start, you don't want to have something solid because your body's not good at digesting during exercise. That first half an hour, your body's also not that good at breaking down solid foods. That's not the focus of the body. But get a liquid fuel in straight away, liquid recovery fuel, and that is the first part of your refueling. And then 45 minutes later, then you have your nice healthy meal of non-processed whole foods, primarily complex carbohydrates, with a bit of healthy fats and protein. And that's your goal for recovery fueling. And then the next slide, please, Sean. And then you'll see a guy lying on a couch. That is not Brian Frank, our founder. I always thought it was, but it's not Brian Frank, our founder. It's somebody else. And there is your basic guidelines of what you want to consume straight away. 30 to 60 grams of complex carbohydrates, and then 10 to 20 grams of protein. And that's a 3-to-1 ratio of carbohydrates to protein. Whereas the in-race ratio, the Perpetuum, was an 8-to-1, and the bars are 6 or 7-to-1. So that 3-to-1 ratio is well established as the ideal recovery ratio of complex carbohydrates to protein. And the biggest difference with the protein versus what you consume afterwards and during plant-based, because you break down animal protein, you increase acidity. You don't want more acidity during exercise. But then post-exercise, when your body is exercising less, you're not that worried about acidity at that moment because you're not exercising anymore. You can actually have a whey protein isolate, which is the most complete form of protein you can actually consume straight away. And that's what you do within 30 minutes. And the nice thing is if you have 1 serving of Recoverite or 2 scoops, you will get 30 grams of complex carbohydrates and 10 grams of protein straight away. So you're already halfway to completing your recovery fueling just by using Recoverite. And I can never stress enough how amazing that product is. I do believe it's the greatest recovery drink you will ever try. And I've tried them all, and everyone that I've ever got to use it, they can't believe how different they feel. If they train in the morning, their energy levels during the rest of the day is way better. And the nice thing is, even if you use it in the evening after a late evening session, because it's not full of simple sugars, it's not going to negatively affect your sleeping that night. And there's also 3 grams of L-glutamine, which helps you to sleep better. So a very, very good recovery fuel. Then we've got 1 or 2 other slides that are just generalized slides. Our supplements, incredibly good, high quality supplements, 4 different ranges there. Daily essentials, which are your daily vitamins and minerals. We've got a well-being range where we have something called PSA, or prostate specific advantage, and a few other products. We have a recovery range, which is the yellow labels. And then we've got a peak performance range, which some of you might be interested in. One of them being an endurance amino acid range, or BCAAs, very, very good quality too. And then we have something called tissue rejuvenator, which is part of the recovery range too. So great range of supplements. We're not really known as that. We're known for more of endurance fuels, but have a look at those. And then, yeah, I think there is more, is there not, Sean? Yes, but wait, there's more. Just the support. So if you ever do need advice about specific events, we've spoken quite generally now. You might have, maybe you're doing obstacle course racing, or maybe you do have a paddle tournament coming up, something like that. You need slightly different fueling guidelines. Please don't hesitate to contact me or contact us. As I said, I've got a nice all-round knowledge about different sports and the products and how to utilize them for different events and sports. Right. Any questions? No questions today?
Absorb.
Maybe perhaps put your email address into the chat.
Yeah, I'll do that quickly.
So that people know how to get hold of you. And I think while Neil's doing that, I just first of all want to just say a big thank you to Neil and for all the effort and updates that he does in terms of keeping current with the happenings. This is a minefield. If you guys are not prone to researching nutrition and staying up with it, it really can become overwhelming. So that's why we've seen the need to employ somebody like Neil to look after you guys individually. He's like your nutritional expert. You can email him, you can contact him, speak to him over weekends or whenever you have got the time. And it's amazing what I've seen him do for athletes to get them to where they need to be. So, often we walk down these supermarkets or into the pharmacies and we see these huge rows of mass nutrition, these bling labels that are claiming all sorts of weird and wonderful things. But at the end of the day, it's all about knowledge, and knowledge is power. So if you understand some of the basics that you learned tonight, I think these kind of things can help you in a huge way. Neil also does our social media. So, if you want to stay up to date with all the latest stuff happening at Hammer, all the latest trends, and certainly the product educational side, Neil pops all that out on social media. So you really, speaking to the person. And, I also noticed we've had a couple of special guests. Nikki Love, one of them, who's on our screen. Welcome, Nikki. Pretty much unexpected, but she's just done a huge run across Australia. So, these are the kind of things that you can learn on social media and read about these things. We'll be posting some of the information that she shares soon about that. And she pretty much used Perpetuum for a long part of that race. So, these fuels are designed not only just for multi-hour, but for multi-day. And, many, when we launched Perpetuum, couldn't believe that you could use one product that could take you for 24 hours and longer. It's incredible what these fuels can do. So certainly reach out to Neil. He's a wealth of knowledge, as you guys have heard. And as I say, please also support Paul at Soulmate. He's doing wonderful things, getting the educational side out. And often we're so focused on our training and everything, and nutrition is probably the most important discipline, especially for us doing these long distance events. So yeah, this is a passion for us. We're happy at any time to answer emails, to speak to you guys individually, however you guys want to do it. But reach out to us. We're there to help.
Well, thanks both. Just to add as well, yeah, obviously other brands are available, but I think what I said to Sean and Neil before the call is that we're not getting this level of kind of engagement, for want of a better word, from other brands, and making themselves available to put these sort of webinars on so people can feel better for these longer races. So yeah, please reach out to Neil or myself, and I can speak to Neil at the shop. Yeah, I've stuck the range of products we got in the shop there. We've got a big tub of heat if you want to come and try it first. So yeah, just use us and abuse us, I think is the theme.
Yeah, fantastic. Are there any questions, guys? I mean, please feel free to put them in the chat groups, even if they're short and sweet. As I say, normally we get overwhelmed with questions, but you're more than welcome to. And if this is maybe not the avenue for you, then certainly you've got Neil's email address there. He'll be happy to help you and tailor-make your specific training. Many athletes we see say, no, I don't want to switch over to anything because I've got races coming ahead. But as you guys go out of the season now, this is probably the best time to experiment and to try different things. So by the time the season starts in early January, you're pretty much ready to get your thing on track. So yeah, guys.
Then Sean, I'd just like to add then, if everyone's got their social media open, don't forget we are on Instagram and Facebook. And another simple way to get hold of me is to send a message via social media. Very easy way to get hold of me, and then I'll always get back to you as soon as possible and give you links to wherever you want to go. We have a huge amount of articles on our website. So if you go onto the website and look under tips and news, you will find a load of information about the products, but also about things that aren't specifically Hammer related, but just about fueling for different events. Obviously, we'd love you to always use Hammer Nutrition, but ultimately it's about getting your fueling right and knowing what is the best way to fuel for yourself.
All right. Thank you, guys. We will share the link with Paul tomorrow. So please reach out to either Paul or Neil if you guys want to go through this. I know it's been a lot for you to absorb, but I think at the end of the day, if you just hone it down to those 5 secrets, it'll certainly help you start paving the way. And at any time, as we mentioned, Neil is available to help you. Very much for attending the talk. And we look forward to doing many more in the future. Hopefully it's something we can do in the next couple of months as you gear up to the start of the new season. So Paul, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks both. Thanks everyone for attending.
Thank you, everyone. Hopefully we'll chat to you soon.
Fantastic. Thank you, guys.
Bye.